guys, today I'm going to be doing a book review on two Disney themed books. The first being When You Wish Upon a Star by Elizabeth Lim and Fire and Fate by Serena Valentino. This book, this is obviously Hades from Disney's Hercules. This is one of the latest books in the Disney Villains book series by Serena Valentino. These books just keep getting worse and worse and worse. You guys, why do I keep continuing to buy these books? Why? Somebody, please tell me why. I'll let you know why. I'm a sucker for these covers. I love the cover design. And then like underneath is always a really cool image of like the villain like in some sort of rage mode. I love it. So yeah, that's kind of why I primarily get these books. I'm a sucker for the covers. Let's be real. Every time I review a book in the Villains series, I feel like I am just a broken record at this point. I'm repeating the exact same things, the same issues that I'm having with this series. So far, out of all the books that I've read in this series, I think I've only enjoyed maybe 3 of them. And there's a lot in this series, because I want to say this is like book 10 or something. I've only enjoyed like 3. And I did not like this book. I gave it 1 star on Goodreads. And here's the thing. I love the character of Hades. He is such an amazing Disney villain. I love his humor. And you know, that's kind of just it. Hades' humor in the Hercules movie, it works. Just the nature of how that movie is, everything about that movie works. It's really specific to that movie. When you try to translate that over into like a book like this, it does not work in my opinion. The pop culture references do not work. It just sounds kind of like stupid, you know. Once again, these books, they're supposed to be like origin stories to your favorite Disney villains, and I feel like they're never really proper origin stories. You get like just a really brief bit of an actual origin story, and more than anything, the books, they aren't even really about the villain on the cover, unfortunately. Serena Valentino has created like a whole universe and a whole world of her own original characters, her own original creations, and these original characters interact with the Disney characters, and I'm just not a fan of that. I don't like it. And yeah, another issue I have, these books are not standalones. You have to have read every single book in this series, and even in order to even comprehend what the hell is even going on in this book. So yeah, there's a lot of factors that just do not work for me with these Disney Villains series, and you may be thinking to yourself, well, stop reading them, stop buying them. I have a problem, okay? I admit that I have a problem. I'm a sucker for these covers, and like I said, I've enjoyed like 3 of the books out of this series, and I always purchase each one with the hope of maybe it'd be good, maybe it'd be better, and a lot of times it's not. So yeah, like I said, I really have no interest in reviewing this book further. I'd much rather talk about the Twisted Tale book, because I have yet to be like totally disappointed with the Twisted Tale books. So yeah, let's move on to that. When You Wish Upon a Star is book 14 in Disney's Twisted Tale series by Elizabeth Lim. Set 40 years before the events of Pinocchio, following the beginnings of the Blue Fairy when she was a young woman named Chiara, and the relationship she has with her sister Ilaria, who turns into the resentful Scarlet Fairy. Okay, here's the thing with this book, because I know I was just saying I have yet to actually be disappointed with any books in the Twisted Tales series. Here's the thing with this book. This is actually not a bad book by any means. If anything, I still really highly enjoyed this book. I liked the story of the Blue Fairy, you know, like kind of before the events of Pinocchio and whatnot. The thing is, these Twisted Tales books, the whole thing of this series, each book, it's asking a what if question, a what if scenario, something that's going to hopefully dramatically change the course of events from the classic Disney story that you know. So what this book is asking, it's asking, what if the Blue Fairy wasn't supposed to help Pinocchio? Sounds intriguing. The thing is, this book absolutely failed with the whole what if premise. this book didn't really kind of fit with how I think this series is, if that makes sense. Like I said, the point of this series is to dramatically kind of change something. And if anything, this book, it's a huge origin story to the Blue Fairy, where she came from, how she became the Blue Fairy, her relationship with her family and her sister, and yeah, how we get to the events of Pinocchio. And that's where this book kind of almost falls flat in some ways. It's more an origin story, and what is happening has really nothing to do with the events of Pinocchio. The events of Pinocchio, when you finally get to that, kind of in the last chunk of this book, the events of Pinocchio happen the exact same way. Nothing changes. Nothing is different. Like I said, the only thing about this book that's different is it's an origin story to the Blue Fairy. That's all this book is exploring. And that's why I say, on the surface, there's nothing wrong with this book, because I really love this book. I really enjoyed it. But is it a Twisted Tales book? No, in my opinion. I think it definitely really kind of failed in the premise and the concept, if that makes sense. It's like if this book was just a random Disney standalone book just out there in the universe, I would totally be fine with this. But yeah, as part of the Twisted Tales series, it does not work. Like, I think some of the best books in the series that have genuine ramifications for things, like one of my favorites, I love the Little Mermaid book. That one's called Part of Your World. And that one, it's asking, what if Ariel and Eric, what if they didn't defeat Ursula? At the end of that movie, they defeat Ursula. So it's asking, what if they didn't? And we get this wonderful flashback, or not flashback, but a flash forward like 5 years into the future, them not destroying Ursula, what that has done to their two kingdoms, the kingdom on land with Eric and the kingdom under the sea with Ariel, what that has done. And yeah, we've had 5 years of Ursula as Vanessa, like ruling up on land and whatnot. And that really dramatically changes the story in some ways, just by having Ursula win at the end of that movie. And I think all of the books in the series, for the most part, do that. Some better than others, but they all do something that changes some part of the narrative, whether that's something at the beginning, something in the middle, something at the end. And yeah, once again, this book changes nothing. The events of Pinocchio happened the exact same way. So getting that out of the way, I'll kind of just head into the book further here. What is When You Wish Upon a Star actually about? Like I said in the brief synopsis, it takes place about 40 years before the events of Pinocchio. The Blue Fairy, before she is the Blue Fairy, she's a young woman named Chiara. She's living in like this little small Italian town with her family and her brother, her sister. She knows Geppetto. At this time, Geppetto himself is a young man, but Geppetto is not in love with the Blue Fairy like you might be thinking. He's in love with her sister, Ilaria. So yeah, what this narrative essentially is about, it's a story about family, and more specifically, it's a story about the relationship between these two sisters. The relationship between the Blue Fairy, Chiara, as she's called, and her sister, Ilaria, who later becomes like the Scarlet Fairy, who is obviously not in, the movie of Pinocchio and whatnot. I really loved the overall general story. Like I said, even though it was not a what if, Twisted Tales story, I still loved getting to know Chiara / the Blue Fairy, getting to see her before she's the Blue Fairy, seeing that relationship she has with her family and her community, and yeah, why the fairies approach her to become a fairy, because she's someone who is genuinely warm and open and genuinely caring, and she hates like doing bad things. She wants to help people, and when she can't help people, she feels bad about it. So that makes her like really good material for a good fairy and whatnot, that she has genuine hope in people, and she has a desire to help people. So I really enjoyed that about Kiara. Now, unfortunately, that kind of does make Kiara a tad bit of a boring protagonist, you know, because she's like pure good. You know, she doesn't really have any sort of flaws to her. And I think the most interesting, fascinating character that came out of this book that I walked away, you know, thinking, wow, I loved her sister, Ilaria. Ilaria, she's the younger sister, and she feels a lot of resentment sometimes and a little bit of jealousy. And yeah, Ilaria has grand dreams to become like a famous opera singer. And she thinks when Kiara becomes the Blue Fairy, she thinks, hey, my sister, she'll be able to help me. She'll be able to grant my wish to become an opera singer. And in this universe, that's not how wish granting works. You know, there's more like rules and regulations to it. Fairies can't just willy-nilly hand out wishes, you know. So yeah, when her sister Ilaria kind of learns that lesson the hard way, Ilaria, she's really bitter and hateful and angry, and she's upset with her sister, and yeah, in turn she gets seduced to the dark side, and she becomes the Scarlet Fairy, and she's part of like an evil sect of evil fairies and whatnot that the good fairies have to kind of fight and battle with near the end of this book, as like the events of Pinocchio are going on, all hell and chaos are going down. And as I was mentioning, I kind of just wish this book was just a random standalone book, and I kind of wish this book had nothing to do with Pinocchio, because in some ways the events of Pinocchio almost feel a little forced into this narrative, kind of right at the tail end of this book. It almost feels a little forced and a little rushed, and Elizabeth Lim did such a good job establishing kind of the world building and setting up Kiara and her sister. You know, you spend a lot of time in the 40 years prior, like more than half of this book. So yeah, all of that is what worked for me as the reader. And yeah, by the time we got to the Pinocchio stuff, I kind of really didn't care. I found kind of some of that just kind of boring. Pinocchio is honestly not one of my favorite um, Disney cartoons. Now, I do love Figaro, you guys. You can see I have Figaro over here in a pumpkin. I do adore me some Figaro, but that's about it. And kind of getting into the thematic stuff again really quickly, as I already said, this book is definitely about family. It's about a relationship, an unbreakable bond between sisters. And yeah, it's also about just the shades of good and evil. You know, no one is like pure good, no one is pure bad. There's shades of gray there. There's nuance, you know, why people kind of go in the directions that they do. There's complications and issues and whatnot. And yes, sometimes the world wants to group you this way or this way, when that's kind of the wrong way to go about it, you know. So this book is definitely kind of exploring that whole notion, you know, life is just a big old shade of gray, and you're kind of fluctuating between it. You know, you don't have to be one specific thing. So if you've made it this far into the Disney Twisted Tales series, even though this fails in the concept, I still highly recommend this book, because I personally still found it to be really enjoyable. I know there were a lot of people on Goodreads who did not really like this book, but all of the books, seriously, all the books in the series are like that. You're either really going to like them or hate them. It's kind of just going to depend on what you specifically are looking for in these retellings, you know. But yeah, I have yet to be like totally disappointed with any of the books in this series. I still highly enjoy them. And yeah, this is another really interesting spin, you know, on the story of Pinocchio. I liked seeing things from like the point of view of the Blue Fairy and whatnot, you know, instead of like a Disney princess. There's so many books that focus on the Disney princesses, so it was kind of like, hell yes, the Blue Fairy, she gets some sort of story, you know, and some sort of action movie narrative. I loved it. So you guys, that is it for my 2 Disney themed book reviews. Have you guys read either of these books? Like I said, I don't recommend the Disney Villains series. I think they're badly written. They're just god-awful and terrible. I definitely recommend much more highly the Twisted Tales series. So yeah, have you guys read any of these series? Do you plan on checking them out? Just let me know. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye, guys.